G'day trendsetters, welcome to episode 11 of the Wabi podcast. Today I'd like to explore simultaneously appealing to the tourist and the purist. The tourist being the open-minded, curious member of the general public, and the purist being the more conservative, tradition-loving practitioner of the way of tea. I want to get stuck into this topic today because I feel that my beloved art of Chanayu is at a turning point. There's museum tea, which is primarily Grandmaster tea, all the schools in a sort of custodianship, guarding their sacred traditions and expecting everybody else to follow suit. But within these schools of tea, there's different factions and individual practitioners like moi, who are trying to appeal to a wider audience and democratise tea a little bit more and appeal to both the tourist and the purist at the same time. You could say museum tea versus modern tea, but it's not. When you look at the history of the way of tea, it was extremely contemporary and radical and out there right from the onset. And that epoch when the big figures like Rikyū and Oribe were practicing tea was already extremely contemporary. And it's more a continuation of those ideas that the founders of tea laid down, rather than just reiterating those radical ideas, which have now become part of the tea canon. I wholeheartedly believe that museum tea and modern tea are not mutually exclusive ideas. They're not at odds, they're just different nods. So let's get in there and pick things apart with view to a fresh start. Polish the floor, grab a tea, and tune in. Right from the get-go, I need to give a hat tip to our man Virgil Abloh. One of his design principles is actually simultaneously appealing to the tourist and purist. He talks about this in different lectures. I'll post some of the key inspirations for this podcast in the description field. And I find myself going back to Virgil Abloh's philosophy and thinking towards art and design every now and again, because it absolutely hums with fresh ideas that we can apply to our approach to the traditional art of the way of tea, towards carving a future that appeals both to the purist and tourist. Virgil was deeply influenced by Renaissance art and also modern culture, street culture, DJs, streetwear, and he mixed all these things together. And out of that mix came the beautiful idea of simultaneously appealing to the tourist and purist. And he thought that great art nailed this concept. Great art unlocked this secret appeal to both the tourist and purist. So a purist embodies deep knowledge of a certain tradition. They'll have a great historical background in the art that they practice, and their view is very nuanced. They can see a lot of the different associations and references going on in a certain work. So for instance, in a tea gathering, a purist will be able to look at the different classical array of objects presented in the gathering and understand the stories behind them and the history and the illusions that the tea master is doing by piecing these objects together in the one room for that particular gathering. Whereas a tourist will have very little background knowledge and just see the objects as beautiful works in and of themselves or not, and not understand necessarily the associations, the conceptual associations going on behind the pairings of the different artworks in the room. So the ultimate purist would probably be the Grandmaster of any given tradition, and people like museum curators and practitioners kind of like myself that have a very high level of qualification in their particular tradition and are qualified, got all the papers, got a tea name like yours truly. And a big part of their activities would be continuing the traditional form of their art. So for instance, for me, continuing to display a traditional view of the practice of the Ueda Soko way of tea. So an unhealthy aspect of being a purist is when you get conservative, and conservative in a way that you are unable to see the value of new ideas and new ways of doing your art and reinterpretations for the modern day to make it relevant to the times, and go around poo-pooing the practice of new upcoming people that have enthusiasm and desire to push the boundaries of the way of tea, or any particular art form. So to contrast with the purist are the tourists. These are the open-minded, interested members of the public that are uneducated, but nonetheless they see something of value in the practice of the way of tea or any particular art, and latch onto something essential that is beautiful and appeals to both purist and the tourist, something at the heart of that art that open-minded, curious people can see. And it goes without saying that tourists are of an infinitely greater scale than the purists, a lot more of them, and the tourists are people that can recognise the infinite value of things like, do you want a cuppa? And the interpersonal bond that's formed between phrases like this also have a spiritual aspect. So therefore tourists will be people that maybe have an already existing practice of something like yoga or meditation or another art form, and see that tea has something that they can learn from, and by getting into this art or interacting with it at a basic level, they'll be able to grow and evolve their own particular practice, and may even lead to becoming a practitioner of that art in the future. But, of course, not necessarily so. There could be people that just appreciate the art from a distance, like my mum and dad, who are quite happy to sit down and have a cuppa with me when I make a bowl of tea through a temai, but they're not going to be in it for a 4-hour voluptuous unfolding of my great art and be there from the start to the finish with me. They just want to have a bloody good cup of tea and a sit down, nice calm time, and they're happy. So you can see these two perspectives of purist and tourist create a tension that great art can simultaneously appeal to. So in tea, people can appreciate sitting down and sharing a bowl of tea with another person in a secluded room with a lovely curated display of artworks with a certain theme resonating with the seasons to draw us closer into a deep bond in the moment. And a purist will take all these different disparate elements of the Japanese tea ceremony and work them into and forge them into something infinitely more detailed than what a tourist can imagine. So behind the different pieces that are arranged in the tea room, create a story around the associations that each piece embodies. And the sophisticated arrangement of these makes or breaks the particular teaist, and a deep knowledge and understanding of different etiquette forms and what the unspoken words that they say, and the good and bad aspects of these, and the judgments that come in there, and also training so that you'll be able to embody the different forms of tea preparation. There's a certain skill level that can be obtained there, which is appealing to purists. And then to take a particular practitioner's way of practicing tea, whether it be Rikyu or Oribe, Enshu, Ueda-soko, and create a tradition out of a particular style and try to uphold that tradition can also be a mark of mastery in your particular art and school of tea. And trying to reproduce this faithfully each time you practice tea can be a badge of honour for a purist. But in the end, there's some sort of living essence that underlies the fascination for both a purist and a tourist that can come out in great expressions of the way of tea and any art. And I want to focus in on the value of striving towards this in our tea practice. So let's start with some examples of great artworks that bridge that gaping divide between the tourist and the purist. We should start with Virgil's own example, which is Christo and Jean-Claude's work, the Arc de Triomphe, where they took cloth and covered the entirety of the massive monument in Paris, the Arc de Triomphe. And a phrase that Virgil uses, which crystallises the appeal of these great artworks, is that they are conceptually profound and immediately accessible. Conceptually profound and immediately accessible. So the conceptually profound aspect appeals to the purist, and the immediately accessible aspect appeals to the tourist. In the case of the work Arc de Triomphe, by turning a massive historical monument into a work of abstract art, it appeals philosophically to an art enthusiast or a purist, and just the sheer visual impact of the work appeals to the tourist. Some other works that we could give as an example would be, for instance, Van Gogh's Starry Night. It's a very famous work, and the dynamic play of the colours and the swirls of the starry night sky appeals to the tourist, and the divergence from classical painting and that reconceptualization of what a classical starry night sky would be, but somehow capturing something more and beyond of that sublime essence of a starry night sky in the way that he used the colours and the formal aspects of the painting, of course, is very interesting to an art connoisseur. You could take Monet's paintings too, Claude Monet. The way that he captured light in his use of oil colours was just mesmerising. So the great skill that he's shown in his composition of these paintings, of course, appeals to a tourist, while, again, the sheer visual impact appeals to a tourist. You could take some street art examples as well, that broken through into the purist realm. So, for instance, Banksy's Girl with the Balloon is philosophically interesting because it is a profound symbol of hope and loss. But at the same time, it's widely accessible because of the simplicity of the image and the immediate relatability, and therefore appeals to a wide audience. Then his flower thrower, so replacing a Molotov cocktail with a bunch of flowers, transforming a violent gesture into a peaceful gesture, provides a powerful message that appeals to the purist, and the power of the image appeals immediately to tourists. Other contemporary works that appeal to both ends of the scale could be things like Kusama Yayoi's mirror rooms, the infinity rooms. Of course, they mesmerise purists and tourists alike with their mystique. A performance artwork like Marina Abramovich's The Artist is Present piece drew in hundreds or if not thousands of people from the general public, at the same time appealing to the purist with its emotional intensity and conceptual undertones. One of my favourites, John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Billboard series that ran across multiple major cities at the same time. War is Over, If You Want It, still hugely relevant today, appealing both to the purist and the tourist. And in my own world, the world of the Japanese tea ceremony, Pierre Sernet, his Tea Cube series, or the One series, where he did tea in multiple different locations of very different cultures all over the world, with just a skeleton cube representing a tea house and inviting locals into that space to share a bowl of tea. This is an absolute masterwork that captures the essence of tea very well. It shows that apparently incompatible cultures and worldviews can cohabit in the same space in harmony. This is really what the way of tea is all about. And the photographs of him offering tea to people in radically different cultures and environments is a way to convey this core value of the way of tea in very powerful images. So with this last example of the tea cube, you could be forgiven for thinking, what's the bloody problem, madam? It seems that everything's in good hands. There's contemporary examples of the way of tea that appeal to both the purist and the tourist. But actually, this is one rare example of a work or an expression of the art of tea that appeals both to the tourist and purist in a sea of asphyxiating, conservative, purist expressions. So through this positioning or purist positioning of tea as a static cultural form, Grandmaster tea has become more or less museum tea. Something like classical music, where people repeat old classical pieces composed hundreds of years ago, but not necessarily explore the possibilities of the music and the art form. These things may have their place, but it shouldn't become everything. And at the moment, museum tea is overwhelming in China-Yu culture. So how do we add a healthy tension into the mix? How do we challenge institutions or schools of tea towards pursuing something more living, more real, so to speak? If you have a look at Duchamp's fountain, of course the urinal that he placed in the Armoury exhibition of 1917, what he was doing with that piece was challenging the accepted notions of what an artwork can be. So putting this right in the middle of the art institution and challenging them to consider it as an artwork. Some people thought yes, some people thought no. Whether this work could be one that is seen as bridging the gap between both purist and tourist is probably an extremely sticky philosophical problem to tease out. I'd probably err on the side of no, it's not one of these exemplary works, but rather it's an exemplary piece to show how reimagining objects as artworks is an extremely dynamic practice that brings art closer to everyday life. And tea already did this 450 years ago. One of the radical, groundbreaking ideas that became central to the tea ceremony as a separate art into and of itself was mitate, or reimagining everyday objects as art pieces to be used in the tea ceremony. So rather than rely on expensive Chinese art pieces made specifically with tea in mind, to see objects like rice bowls and noodle bowls that you would use from a street cellar to slurp some noodles at lunchtime. To see these bowls as tea bowls, 50 cents, 500,000 yen, a urinal, $500,000 sculpture. This conceptual idea was already there in the infancy of the Japanese tea ceremony. But the unhealthy purists are content on repeating the same ideas over and over and over, and they're not fresh anymore. But that's not to say that there's not an appetite to do so. There's a lot of enthusiasm and curiosity towards doing something new with tea, but this enthusiasm often gets crushed. I know that I've been through many, many years of deep frustration with the backlash that I've faced with some of my more contemporary approaches and expressions of tea. But somehow I've found a way to maintain my passion and drive, which is kind of also leading me towards doing this podcast. Even recently, when I did an exhibition during COVID of Tanzaku, calligraphy works, my idea behind the exhibition was to show that rather than traditional calligraphic forms, just simple abstract forms can crystallise people's minds around a certain theme in the tea room. This is the essence of using calligraphy in a tea gathering. A Zen phrase of 4 or 5 characters of calligraphy can evoke a koan, a famous story in the Zen canon, that can focus people's minds on a central theme to ponder during the tea gathering. But there's a lot of people that can't read calligraphy, and probably a lot more people that can appreciate abstract art. So appealing to tourists that can appreciate abstract forms and abstract art, I'm trying to bridge the gap between purists that will understand the concept behind those abstract forms and people that can just appreciate the sheer look and feel of the artwork on the wall. But during the exhibition, I had one purist who wrote a long email spelling out all their different credentials and history about why, lending to the fact that they were an authority and their opinion should be respected in these matters, basically telling me at the end that they hated it. But whatever, here I am still passionately believing that that was a valid expression of a central aspect of my art. I want to explore the idea of seemingly incompatible ideas coming into harmony through the Japanese tea ceremony. And I want to invite you to contemplate a juxtaposition of Grandmaster and Mixmaster. So Grandmaster, of course, is the custodian of the tradition, and a Mixmaster is somebody that's willing to mix the tradition with contemporary art or contemporary ideas. If we think about where the Mixmaster comes from, it's more or less a DJ, and mixing different breaks or different genres of music together actually gave birth to a whole new art form, being hip-hop. So we think about Grandmaster Flash. What a ironic name for the person that we're exploring. Grandmaster, Mixmaster. The Mixmaster we're using as an example is actually the Grandmaster Flash! So what this genius did is he took an 8-track mic mixer and he added an external cueing system to this 8-track mic mixer. And then onto that he engineered an output that he could use as a headphone so he could hear the track that he was cueing before it was put into volume through the speakers that the audience could hear. So this created a system through which he could mix different genres of music, taking different breaks, say from jazz and disco, and mix them together to create whole new loops of engaging music that people could break dance to and rap over. An example of a break is like the real juicy piece of a song that just makes you go, ah, like the beat in Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. Just that's like, as soon as you hear that, everyone just comes alive. Ah, yes. These are like wake seijaku, the essential parts of the way of tea. These breaks being the essential elements of a particular song or genre of music that really make the heart sing are like wake seijaku, harmony, respect, purity and tranquility. These pillars of the art that when you see them evoked in the tea room, just make your heart sing and think, ah, this is fantastic. And you can take those breaks, harmony, respect, purity and tranquility, and mix them with contemporary ideas and contemporary art in order to create different expressions, like a DJ set, a mashup. I'm not saying that we're trying to create a different genre of the Japanese tea ceremony per se, but there is certainly scope for different ways to conduct the art rather than the traditional form. So, to show the traditional form and to tease out the possibilities that are waiting there to be brought out more into our greater environment, the normal way of conducting a Japanese tea ceremony that we all learn and aspire to under the Grandmaster system is basically a 4-hour-long tea gathering of the following parts. You start off by refreshing the charcoal. There's a way to do this, a procedure that we have to learn. Refreshing the charcoal and the incense and the ash in the hearth or the brazier. After that, while you're waiting for the water to come to the boil, you serve your guests a meal, kaiseki, or a more abbreviated meal, tenshin. Then after that, you'll have a sweet, an interval where the guests go out into the garden. Then they come back in the room, the water's boiled. You prepare a bowl of thick tea, koicha, and then after that, you either stay in the same room or move to a different room and serve a lighter, more casual bowl of tea called usucha. Then after that, you've clocked about 4 hours' time. Then everybody goes home, takes their kimono off, airs it out, puts some casual clothes on, puts their feet up, has a sniff drink, reflecting on the ordeal. And the host is back home, packing up for the next 2 or 3 days. And we all think, ichigo ichie, one meeting, one lifetime, one meeting, never bloody doing this again. I jest. Of course, 4-hour-long gatherings are beautiful, and I really like sharing these 4-hour-long expressions of our art form with other purists. There's some value in maintaining this form and doing it. But the value dries up if there's no bridge between the purist and the tourist. So if you take the breaks, the juicy bits, the parts of that symphony that just make you go, yes, and evoke them more in a shorter, abbreviated form that can appeal more to tourists at the same time satisfying purists. As a guest, one of the things I'm most interested in, rather than eating a meal, is the art aspects of a tea gathering. And it's an art form, so this is rather the central focus, drinking the tea and the poetical medley of art pieces on display that day. The tea and the art are the two most engaging parts of a Japanese tea ceremony. So already there's the hint right there of things that need to be brought out and bridge purist and tourist perspectives. One of the essential elements is the harmony in the tea room, or that sense of calm that you get. And by being in a calm state, it's all the more easier to relate to seemingly incompatible cultures and people that you might find yourself with in the tea room. So working towards creating a common sense of calm in the tea room is an essential element of the tea gathering. And doing incense is a great way to bring people to that space. Our sense of smell touches something very primal in our reptilian brain, and sharing some beautiful incense together is a way to focus people's attention that allows people to share a harmonious, tranquil, calm space. A tourist might not necessarily want to see the full charcoal refreshing procedure, so do incense. It's a lot more interesting for a tourist, but at the same time, a purist gets to see the preparation of ash and well-selected aloes wood and engage those more knowledgeable intellectual sides of the practice. Rather than have the meal, you might just have a couple of morsels with some sake to purify the insides, or you eliminate that altogether and just have a sweet. And after the sweet, you might go straight into the koicha ceremony, the thick tea ceremony, where everybody shares that meditative bowl of tea together. After that, you might call it a day, or you might make a spritz in place of the meal and the sake, and just have a casual drink in the garden before saying bye-bye to everybody. Or another approach could be sharing a bowl of conversational thin tea between everybody and talk about the proceedings and what happened, and the tourists can be educated by the purists and what they have to say. And the purists can likewise be educated by the tourists, what they found appealing throughout the gathering and the elements that really spoke to the heart. After abbreviating the meal aspect of the tea gathering, I could also consider the opposite. One of the pieces of wisdom that Rick Rubin offers in his latest book is the possibility that when you create a piece of art, that the opposite could also be true. So the opposite of a particular idea also has some value for consideration. So by abbreviating the meal, the hospitality aspect of tea, I've lessened in my expression of the example that I just gave. But for somebody maybe not as inclined towards the formal beauty of the tea preparation ceremony, just the sheer fact of making a bowl of tea and sharing it with somebody could be the main thrust of their expression. And just the bare fact of sharing that gesture of hospitality is something that somebody may wish to evoke through their particular tea gathering. And therefore, the meal might become into greater focus. And with that, the tea that's offered might not be koicha, it could just be a very simple form of an usucha, or thin tea preparation ceremony. So for a purist like me, I'm still going to love the fact that I've been invited to this gathering and that tea is one of the focuses of this gathering, and that the host has taken the time to learn and embody a simple tea preparation procedure and treat me that as a part of their expression of hospitality. You've got to think about what sort of tracks, what sort of breaks that your guests are going to like and get into. So if I link it back to the DJ, the Mixmaster model, one of the greatest DJ sets I've ever seen is when the Avalanches played Summer Sonic in Japan in 2002. I'll also share the link to this set in the description. And there's a sequence in this set where they mix in a song by the Chemical Brothers and then Res by Underworld. You've got two of the greatest dance tracks of all time. And so you've got them overlapping and pumping through each other, creating this synergy that's just bringing everybody's emotion up and up and up and heightening and heightening and heightening the excitement in the air. And then something unexpected, that element of surprise. They drop in Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, just the build-up to that song. And as it builds up, they drop in a song by Daft Punk and just sends everybody crazy. And so you think of these four tracks, and they're disparate genres, of course. Underworld, Daft Punk, Chemical Brothers are very similar, but Guns N' Roses is a completely different genre of music. And mixing those together is creating a whole new expression that brings the purists and tourists, i.e. pure dance music lovers, and tourists, i.e. metal and rock and roll lovers, together. Surely Slash and Axl will see what they did and think, that's bloody awesome. If they don't, they're a bit too up their own genre for their own good. So when you're going to create a mix of these disparate elements of our art form, so incense, charcoal, thick tea, thin tea, kimono, food, art arrangement, calligraphy, architecture, gardening, you can pick the different breaks, the different pieces of the aspects of our art and thread them together in a mix that's going to appeal to your audience on that particular day or your guests on that particular day. And expanding that idea of inviting completely different genres into your world, so in that Avalanches mix, by mixing in tracks like Guns N' Roses and even Bob Dylan, there's a synthesis created that enriches our collective experience. So I've just outlined some examples that stick to the traditional parts of our art and how to arrange those in different ways that might appeal to purist and tourist. But even more exploratory angles could be incorporating music into a tea gathering. So you might have, over the incense ceremony, you might find a way to mix in some ambient music that you might have a friend in the mizzy or the preparation room projecting out into the room, or there's another idea, having some projections in the room as you make tea. You could reconfigure the tea room rather than have your guests usually on your right side sitting beside you. You could set up your stuff in the middle of the room and have people sitting in a circle, a different new architectural approach to conducting a tea gathering. And the music idea is actually an ancient idea, but it's something that's been left behind. There was a concept of kagebue, kage meaning shadow, and fue is a flute. So someone playing a shakuhachi or a flute behind the fusuma in the adjoining room. And so that sound leaching through the paper dividing walls, to hear that in the tea room while you're enjoying the tea ceremony. It doesn't have to be a traditional shakuhachi or bamboo flute. It can be other instruments. You might have the sound of a theremin being played, or even have some aspects of the temai interacting with the theremin. So you might hook up parts of your tea kit to electronic sensors that then feed back in to the synthesizers that then create some sort of spontaneous musical sound that harmonizes for some parts and is in disharmony for other parts. But that heterophony or that discolated harmony is something that can be appreciated by perhaps purists because it aligns with a certain aesthetic that's unique to the tea ceremony. Then tea doesn't have to be all wabi-sabi. You can have a more contemporary, abstract expressionist, colourful expression of tea. Your kimono might change into fashion garments. You might have some deconstructed margiela garments that could harmonise with the pieces that you choose. Or you might be cloaked in a more punkish, colourful Vivienne Westwood attire, and then that could harmonise with the theme of the gathering and the art that you choose and the music that you choose at different parts of the gathering. It could be extremely punkish and hardcore. And of course that would depend on the guests that you're inviting. You want to make sure that they at least have some sort of a propensity or some sort of interest in this culture and subculture in order that you may bridge the purist and tourist in that tea room, taking those discolated and seemingly incompatible cultures and peoples and bringing it into some sort of new arrangement of harmony in the tea gathering, finding that new way to achieve harmony together. This is a real central aspect of tea, which gives it infinite possibilities of interacting with different arts. One thing that comes to mind as I'm talking now is a fantastic exhibition, the summer exhibition at the gallery called Vague in Arles. There's one in Kobe, I think, in Japan, and also the other gallery is in Arles, which is just down the road from where I live here in Marseille. And the exhibition revolved around radically contemporary pieces from the Gutai movement, but it was matched with Jomon period ceramic pieces. And that juxtaposition wasn't just a juxtaposition of discolated parts and disharmonious pieces. The physicality of Jomon pots really harmonised with the physicality of the Gutai paintings. And it created a new synergy between the ancient and the radically new that gave birth to new ideas for the viewer when they're walking around the exhibition. Just imagine if they plonked tea in the middle of that exhibition and allowed you to enjoy tea as you're contemplating the different works and the arrangement and the curatorial of the exhibition. It would have been fantastic. So already in exhibitions like this, you can see this suggestion of the mixmaster mixing radically different time periods and cultures and art movements into some sort of new harmony in which new ideas are born. And making tea a central pillar to that exploration, I think, is an extremely positive thing, and there's infinite potential for tea to find itself anew in spaces like that. But I think one of the essential parts of tea is that rather than dopamine hits, it concentrates more on the serotonin aspect of experience. So that human connection, intimate connection between people releases serotonin, and meditation, the calm, contemplative mind, releases serotonin in the brain rather than those hits of dopamine with radical stimulation that you might get from a new beat dropping or a surprising song being mixed and mashed up with another song in a DJ mix that releases an explosive rush of emotion. The longer period of time and the feelings of calm and serenity and nourishment for the soul that's released over human connection and calm bonds forming over a long period of time is something more suited to the tea ceremony rather than short, sharp hits. So in this way, mastering the form and working on oneself and posture and breath and mastering, embodying a form that you're able to execute in front of people to induce that calm mind state and form that interaction, that personal bond between people by expressing your art, creating a lovingly prepared bowl of tea for somebody and sharing them right in close proximity is more geared towards serotonin than dopamine. And new expressions of tea should probably pick this up and emphasise this, because I think, especially in current society, we're getting a little bit tired of all these bloody dopamine hits, like getting up first thing in the morning looking at your bloody phone. Rather than that, how about resetting people's minds and addiction on dopamine towards a serotonin-induced calm? So rather than picking up your phone when you wake up, leave your phone on the charger and hop in the tea room and practice tea, or meditate, or just make yourself a calm, simple bowl of tea for 15 minutes, contemplating the rising sun and the birds chirping outside, rather than looking at bloody news from yesterday on the other side of the world. The here, the now, the choice to be in the here and now, existing with these infinite possibilities, is where tea's at, rather than dwelling on past examples and regurgitating the same thing over and over again. Of course, that's where the boot camp is, to get your skills and to build up your skills and to get the formal aspects of training. But the freedom certainly has to come after the mastery of form. Joseph Campbell, his famous saying after witnessing Zen monks sitting and meditating in a meditation hall in Japan, he came to the realization that freedom is achieved through form If you go for freedom without the form, all you have is chaos. And if you think of a mixmaster, just getting a pile of records and chucking them together haphazardly, it's going to be absolutely chaos and terrible to the ear. But if you can master your craft and learn how to slow the speeds, adjust the speeds, and mix seemingly disparate but somehow harmonious tracks together, you get these formal technical aspects of your practice down, and that's where a new freedom comes about in your mixes that induce these new heights of emotion and synergies across genres that excite people and promise new things for the future. So tea is in the unique situation where it's not just a practice that's mastered behind the scenes and then shown to people in an exhibition. The exhibition and the practice is actually the gig itself. So the mastery of your craft is actually executed in the space of your exhibition. You have to learn how to conduct an exhibition, i.e. a tea gathering, with a poetical medley of art objects, while you manipulate them in the architectural space that you've created with flowers, calligraphy / painting / contemporary artwork, light meal or sake or not, sweets, all matching into a theme that brings people into the here and now to install new ideas of what's possible. So the ideal aspects and the physical aspects are one in the way of tea. By focusing on the harmonisation of the ideal and the embodied, here again is the promise of something big for the future and the directions that the way of tea may take. So performance artists that are interested in reducing the separation between audience and performer might find hints in their practice that they can get from practicing the tea ceremony, and they can bring their different genres closer together and start imagining different ways to conduct a tea ceremony. And conceptual artists might find different ways to connect with their potential audiences by employing the tea ceremony as a way to embody the ideas that they're proposing to the world. And tea people that have learnt this harmonisation of ideal and physical practice might be helped and compelled by different artists from the contemporary art world to bring out their art form in new ways that can bridge purist and tourist perspectives. There's a big trend of architects jumping on the bandwagon and creating a tea house, and they're usually crap because they don't practice tea. But if they designed them with a tea practitioner or even took the time to learn some of the basic forms and the requirements of practice of conducting tea, these tea houses will find a far more profound and relevant expression that can stretch tea practitioners and bring them out into new areas of exploration in the art world, and therefore bridge the conceptual spaces with the physically lived spaces and try and find some new synergy. And so galleries that have an opening night for a particular exhibition, they can conduct a tea ceremony that allows people to contemplate the works in a more considered fashion rather than coming around, taking a photo, chucking on Instagram, having a drink and going home. Again, transitioning off that constant attack of dopamine hit to a more serotonin-based, calm, contemplative, meaningful interaction with art and other people. As we've seen, the possibilities of tea to enrich our collective experience in the modern world is great. So I invite people to explore the idea of the crystallisation of tradition in Grandmaster tea and the possibilities of Mixmaster tea, mixing up art and culture with the classical forms of tea ceremony, Chana Yu, to find new avenues to apply our practice and take it forward into the world today and into the future, so that we can share our practice and the goodwill that it promises for everybody. So I reckon that's about it. I'll leave you to check out some of the mixes that I've posted below, and if you feel so inclined, you can buy some tea through my website, also buy the Pearl Among the Clouds book. If you're interested in learning this mighty art of the Japanese tea ceremony, both the classical and the possibilities for the contemporary application of the art form, you can contact me via my website. It would be bloody awesome if you could sign up to my Patreon, either paid or free, to support my ongoing activities, exploring the classical forms of the art of tea and the contemporary applications, including this podcast. So until next time, rock the tea house!